Amid the roaring flood, a lone man defies nature itself to rescue two sacred sisters, pulling them from the waters with heroic strength. The dawn paints the valley golden as the chief rides in, flanked by his warriors, the entire tribe watching in awe. With a declaration that will echo for generations, he calls the man a brother, binding him forever to the sacred legacy of the tribe and leaving everyone utterly speechless. The sky hung low, a swollen mass of gray and bruised violet, lightning slicing through the clouds like jagged teeth. Rain fell in relentless sheets, striking the rocky riverbanks, sending sprays of silver into the swollen current. The river roared, swollen with the fury of 1,000 winter storms, its surface torn into white, capped waves that smashed against jagged rocks with the sound of doom itself. Two figures clung desperately to a boulder, their small hands pressing against wet stone as the icy torrent gnawed at their feet. Sacred sisters, the villagers would call them, though sacred meant nothing here but the fragility of human flesh against the river's wrath. Their eyes were wide, reflecting lightning, fear etched in every line of their pale faces. Water surged higher, a living thing intent on swallowing all hope, and the current hissed like a snake in the dark, whispering promises of death. From the cliffside above, a lone man appeared, moving with the deliberate precision of a life honed on the frontier. His coat clung to his shoulders, soaked, plastered with rain, but his eyes were fixed, unblinking, on the peril below. He measured distance and risk with instincts carved from years of solitary survival. Each step on the slick rocks was a gamble. Each glance at the river was a prayer whispered into the storm. The first bolt struck a tree near the sisters, splitting its trunk with a sound like the earth itself breaking. The sisters screamed, voices raw, and the river answered with a violent surge that flung them from their precarious hold. Instinct surged through the frontiersman's veins. He leapt, rock to rock, mud sliding underfoot, arms extended, muscles taut. Time slowed, the wind carrying the smell of wet earth, pine, and the sharp tang of danger. He felt the pull of the river in his boots, the current tugging at everything, but he did not hesitate. Lightning struck again, closer this time, illuminating the river's face in blinding white. He saw them, the sisters' hands slipping, hair plastered to their faces, eyes wide and pleading. He dove, plunging into the icy water, arms outstretched, the river roaring like a beast that had claimed too many lives before. The cold bit into him, and yet he surged forward, guided by a single, unyielding thought. They would not die while he drew breath. The river fought him. Each wave threatened to turn him over, to crush him against jagged rocks. His hands gripped the boulder's slick edge, pulling the nearest sister toward him. She screamed, water flooding her lungs, and he roared over the storm, a sound raw and human, daring the current to claim her. With an effort that seemed to defy all reason, he hoisted her onto his shoulders, balancing against the river's unrelenting force. He reached for the second sister, heart hammering, lungs burning. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the world in violent, fleeting brilliance. She slipped again, and the river claimed her hands, dragging her toward the center of the torrent. Without pause, he plunged into the raging water, hands closing around her wrists, pulling with the strength of desperation, grit, and a stubborn refusal to fail. Rocks tore at his skin, river foam clawed at his eyes, yet still he pressed forward. Every heartbeat felt like an eternity. Every wave threatened to pull them under, yet inch by inch he carved a path toward the riverbank. The sisters clung to him, soaked and trembling, but alive. His muscles burned, arms screaming in protest, but his focus never wavered. Finally, his boots struck firmer ground, and he dragged them into a shallow pool, the river still thrashing, still angry, but unable to take what he had claimed. He collapsed beside them, the wind and rain whipping around their shivering forms. For a brief, impossible instant, the world was nothing but cold, wet silence. Then the river hissed, as if it remembered its wrath and promised vengeance yet to come. The sisters looked at him with eyes that held awe and fear, sacred not just for what they were, but for what had just been delivered, and somewhere, deep in the rolling clouds and distant thunder, the first hint of dawn fought to pierce the storm. The river's roar began to fade, replaced by a trembling hush, as if the storm itself paused to catch its breath. Rain still fell, lighter now, pattering against the rocks, washing the mud into rivulets that snaked down toward the river. The sisters huddled together, shivering, hair plastered to their shoulders, eyes wide and searching. They did not speak, could not yet trust words after the violence of the current. Their breaths came in shallow bursts, the taste of river and adrenaline lingering in their mouths. The frontiersman rose slowly, water dripping from his coat, from his hair, from the hands that had gripped slippery stone until his skin burned. He looked at the river, its violent dance now a chaotic shimmer of foam and reflection, and felt a cold truth. The danger had passed for now, but it was never gone. The river was alive, and it remembered. It would test him again. He helped the sisters to their feet, their small bodies trembling against his own. Every movement was careful, deliberate, one wrong step, and the river could reclaim them in an instant. He guided them to a narrow ledge, high enough to escape the current but slick with mud and rain. The storm clouds began to part slightly, revealing a pale, bruised light of dawn that lent the wet landscape a ghostly glow. Shadows stretched across the rocks, long and trembling, as if the land itself was exhaling after the struggle. The sisters' eyes followed him, wary and curious. There was something sacred in their gaze, a recognition that went beyond gratitude. They had been spared, yes, but there was a weight in their silence, a history he did not yet know. And yet, instinct whispered that their survival was no mere accident. It was a reckoning, a crossing of fates that would bind them to him in ways the river itself could not undo. He scanned the horizon, watching the first light of dawn catch the mist over the water. Trees bent under the last gusts of wind, branches dripping, and somewhere upstream, the river moaned against the rocks that had battered it. A shiver ran through him, not from cold but from understanding. This was only the beginning. Danger, relentless and patient, lurked beyond every bend, every shadow, and he had chosen to meet it head on. The sisters whispered then, voices barely audible above the settling wind. Their words were foreign, melodic, a language shaped by ritual and reverence. He did not understand, yet he felt the weight of their meaning, a silent acknowledgment of the peril they had endured. The river had tested him, and he had not faltered. That act, raw and simple, had bound their destinies together in a way no oath or promise could contain. Lightning flickered once more on the horizon, distant now, a final warning of the river's lingering power. He pulled his coat tighter, wet fabric clinging to his chest, and led the sisters toward a firmer path, away from the water's edge. Every step was cautious, every breath measured, but there was a rhythm to the motion, a cadence born of survival and resolve. Behind them, the river continued its restless song, churning and hissing as if lamenting what had been stolen from its grasp. Ahead, the first pale rays of sunlight struck the rocks, glinting off water droplets like scattered diamonds. And in that fragile, trembling light, the frontiersmen understood the truth of the morning. Courage alone could save lives, but only wisdom and vigilance would see them through the trials yet to come. The sisters followed silently, their trust fragile but present, forming an unspoken bond as they moved together over the slick stones. The storm's fury had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean yet scarred, a landscape of peril and possibility. And as the dawn rose, the river whispered its promise. This was the beginning of a journey that would test hearts, reveal secrets, and demand a courage that few could summon. For now they walked, wet and trembling, toward safety, toward the unknown. And the frontiersmen carried not just the weight of their fragile bodies, but the responsibility of a choice that would echo across river and valley, binding him to a destiny far greater than he had ever imagined. Fog hung low in the valley, a thick, clinging gray that swallowed the distant hills and softened the edges of the world. The river, now calm and murmuring, whispered over rocks slick with rain, a pale reflection of the fury it had unleashed only hours before. The sisters walked silently beside him, their small, shivering forms mirroring the quiet tremor of dawn. And yet, the frontiersman's mind was elsewhere, pulled into shadows long since settled over his soul. Each step over the wet stones brought memories that pressed against his consciousness like the cold wind. Faces long gone, voices he could no longer hear, promises made and broken in the dim corridors of a life spent chasing survival over solace. He remembered the boy who had slipped from his hands, a life claimed by negligence and circumstance, and the woman who had left him with only silence and the echo of sorrow. The weight of those ghosts clung to his shoulders more tightly than the soaked coat, pressing him toward choices he could not undo. He walked on, past the trembling trees and fog-shrouded rocks, and felt the familiar ache of loneliness settle into his bones. Out here, beyond the reach of settlements and safe paths, the land demanded solitude, and solitude demanded reflection. Every act of courage carried a ledger of debts. Every life spared another reminder of lives lost. His eyes scanned the horizon, muted sunlight piercing the fog in thin, pale fingers, illuminating the scars of the land as though it understood the scars he carried within. The sister's small hands brushed against his, seeking guidance without words. Their trust was fragile, delicate as a feather caught in the wind, yet it pressed against him with a force heavier than any river. He could not allow them to falter. The burden of protecting them, of ensuring that this day did not end as so many others had, rested squarely on his shoulders. The river's fury had been a test, but the valley's quiet held the weight of the past, and he walked through it knowing that each step carried echoes of old failures. Memories flooded him like the storm itself. Nights spent staring into dying fires, the bitter cold of winter settling deep into his bones, the lonely howls of wolves echoing his own isolation. He remembered the woman whose life had been entwined with his for a season, lost to a mistake he could neither confess nor forgive. Her face haunted him still, her eyes searching for a promise he could not deliver. Every act of heroism now was both penance and defiance, a refusal to let history claim another victim on his watch. The sisters glanced at him occasionally, their eyes wide and questioning, sensing the tension beneath his calm exterior. They did not know the stories etched into the lines of his face, the battles fought in silence, the moral debts that could never be repaid. And perhaps it was better that way. Perhaps the weight he carried alone could shield them from the darkness that had marked his life. He paused beside a fallen tree, the moss slick underfoot, and breathed in the valley's damp air. It carried the scent of wet earth, pine resin, and the lingering tang of the river's fury. His fingers brushed the bark, rough and real, grounding him in the present even as his mind wandered the shadowed corridors of memory. The river had tested his body, the storm his courage, but the valley now tested his soul, confronting him with the quiet truths he could not escape. He led the sisters onward, each step measured, deliberate. The fog thickened, curling around rocks and trees, muting the valley into a realm of gray and silence, and in that silence he faced the stark truth of who he was, a man defined by the choices he had failed to make, yet capable of the courage to make them now. The past weighed heavy, yes, but it was not an anchor, it was a guide. It whispered warnings, demanded reflection, and reminded him that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the resolve to act despite it. The sisters followed, shivering, leaning on him more out of instinct than understanding. And as he walked, the valley seemed to acknowledge his passage, mist rising in thin threads, light softening the edges of rock and tree, as though even the land waited to see if he would rise to meet the challenges yet to come. The weight of the past was there, pressing, relentless, but for the first time in years he felt a flicker of clarity. He was no longer merely surviving the frontier, he was shaping it, moment by moment, choice by choice, with the lives of these sisters intertwined with the fragile thread of his own redemption. The valley stretched ahead, gray and silent, shrouded in mist that clung to every branch, every stone. The sisters moved close to him, their small hands brushing his coat with tentative trust. He felt their weight, not just in body but in the responsibility that tethered him to the present, demanding vigilance, demanding courage. The river's fury had passed, but the echoes of his past lingered, pressing against him like the fog curling around the trees. Memories came unbidden, flickering like firelight behind closed eyes. A father lost to a winter fever, a brother taken by a careless shot, a home abandoned to the wild. He had wandered through life carrying the weight of these ghosts, and each time he acted, he sought not glory, but absolution, a way to honor the lives that had slipped through his hands. The sisters' survival was another chance, another ledger to balance, and he felt its gravity as keenly as the chill seeping through his soaked coat. He stopped at a clearing where the mist lifted slightly, revealing a riverbank scarred by the storm. Broken branches lay strewn across the ground, mud slick and deep, yet he could see the faint signs of life returning. The soft ripple of water around a submerged rock, a bird taking hesitant flight, the faint shimmer of sunlight through parting clouds. The natural world, battered but unbroken, mirrored the fragile thread of hope that ran through him. Perhaps the past was not only a burden but a guide, shaping him, reminding him of the value of the choices he now made. The sisters watched him, their eyes reflecting awe and a cautious curiosity. They did not speak, and he did not ask them to. Silence was the language of survival here. Instead, he allowed his actions to speak. The careful placing of their feet on stable ground, the steadying hand on a trembling shoulder, the quiet vigilance that communicated safety without words. In these gestures he felt a stirring of something long buried, a purpose beyond survival, a chance to protect, to atone, to honor the lives he had lost. The fog shifted, curling in delicate wisps around the sisters as they moved with him through the clearing. He recalled the countless nights spent by dying fires, the hollow ache of emptiness pressing against his chest, the bitter wind cutting into his face, as if to remind him of every failure, every life lost. But now, with the sisters beside him, with the river's fury behind and the valley's mist ahead, he felt a fragile strength returning, a belief that courage, tempered with wisdom, could shape outcomes that mere recklessness never would. They paused near a small thicket where the fog hung heaviest, shadows twisting in the early light. The frontiersman's eyes swept the terrain, attuned to every detail, the trembling leaves, the hidden hollows, the subtle shifts that spoke of unseen dangers. In the quiet, he felt the pulse of the land as if it too remembered the storm, as if it waited to see what he would do next. He sensed the weight of the past pressing on him still, but it no longer paralyzed him. It guided him, sharpened his instincts, steeled his resolve. As they continued, he felt a tentative connection growing with the sisters, a thread woven not of words but of shared experience and survival. Their small, trusting gestures reminded him of what had been lost, and yet also of what could be preserved. Every step forward was a declaration. The past would not dictate the future. Every careful movement, every protective glance, was an act of defiance against the mistakes that had haunted him. The valley slowly brightened as dawn broke further, the mist lifting in thin ribbons to reveal rocks slick with rain, trees shaking off droplets, and the river curling quietly along its path. He felt the burden of his memories ease, replaced with focus and vigilance. The sisters followed closely, moving with an awareness that mirrored his own, their silent trust binding them together. And in that fragile, mist-filled morning, he understood a truth that had eluded him for years. The weight of the past was never truly something to discard. It was a compass, guiding him through the present, teaching him to measure courage not in strength alone, but in the choices made when every moment could carry consequence. The river had tested his body, the valley now tested his soul. And he was determined not to fail. The journey forward stretched into the fog, uncertain yet imbued with purpose. The sisters, sacred and fragile, walked beside him, their trust a mirror of his own resolve. And as he led them through the valley, each step etched in wet stone and cautious breath, he felt the weight of the past transform, not into chains but into wings, carrying him toward a destiny that demanded bravery, honor, and unwavering vigilance. Mist hung over the riverbanks, curling around jagged rocks and low-lying bushes in delicate, whispering tendrils. The morning light broke through in soft, muted streams, glinting off the wet surfaces with a quiet shimmer. The sisters moved with a strange grace, their small forms weaving through the damp underbrush as though the land itself recognized them, bending subtly to their passage. Their eyes, wide and luminous, held an unspoken depth, as if they carried memories older than the valley itself. The frontiersmen followed silently, every sense sharpened by the lingering tension of survival. The storm was gone, but the world retained its edge. The river's roar was now a quiet murmur, a reminder of the force he had defied. And yet, it was the sisters that drew his attention now, their movements and expressions hinting at something beyond ordinary fear or relief. There was a sacred weight to their presence, a quiet authority, though they were young and fragile. As they walked, the elder sister glanced back at him, eyes flickering with a mixture of caution and curiosity. He met her gaze steadily, recognizing the unspoken questions there. Who was he? Why had he risked his life for them? What force guided his courage? He could offer no words, only the steadfast presence of someone who had chosen, without hesitation, to act when the river demanded it. And perhaps that, in itself, was enough. The mist lifted slightly, revealing patches of riverbank littered with stones polished smooth by years of water. The sisters paused, their heads tilting, listening. Their whispered conversation was a melody foreign to him, syllables that carried weight beyond comprehension, tones that seemed to vibrate with the pulse of the land. He did not understand the words, but he felt their meaning, a recognition of danger, a silent acknowledgement of trust, and perhaps a subtle warning of things yet unseen. A faint wind stirred the trees, rustling leaves like soft applause for their passage. The frontiersman's eyes swept the terrain, trained for danger, but he also observed small, inexplicable gestures. The way the sisters avoided certain patches of ground, the reverence in their careful steps, the slight recoil when the wind shifted suddenly. It was as though the earth itself responded to their presence, acknowledging some ancient bond. He found himself both in awe and slightly unnerved. These were no ordinary girls. Their lineage, their bearing, hinted at a power that reached beyond mere mortal life. Every glance, every cautious movement, suggested that their survival was not merely a matter of luck, but of purpose, sacred and deliberate. He realized that his actions had consequences far greater than the narrow survival of the moment. By saving them, he had intertwined his fate with something vast, something older than the river, older than the valley. The sisters led him through a narrow passage where the mist thickened, curling like smoke over the damp rocks. Sunlight broke through only in thin, trembling beams, casting pale illumination on their faces. Their expressions were serene, yet each carried a tension, a silent awareness of the world around them that suggested knowledge he could not yet fathom. The older sister's hand brushed lightly over the smaller one's shoulder, a gesture both protective and ritualistic, a quiet signal that he sensed but could not fully understand. The river's song rose faintly beside them, a lapping murmur that seemed to respond to their steps. He caught himself glancing at the sisters repeatedly, wondering at the weight they carried in silence. There was more to them than met the eye, a hidden current beneath their fragile forms, a sacred power that demanded respect. And though he could not name it, He felt the gravity of their presence pressing upon him. His role, he understood, was no longer passive. He had been chosen, perhaps by fate, perhaps by chance, to protect what was precious, mysterious, and dangerous. As they moved through the mist, the frontiersman's mind wandered briefly to the tribe he had yet to encounter, the customs and honor codes that would govern their lives. The sisters were sacred, yes, but to whom? To what purpose? He could only guess, but instinct warned him that their importance extended far beyond the simple fact of survival. They were the heart of something larger, and his actions would have consequences that reached into realms he could not yet perceive. The mist shifted, and a faint shimmer appeared across the water, like a trail of silver left by some unseen hand. The sisters paused again, their heads tilting in silent acknowledgment of the river's hidden signs. The frontiersman followed, careful not to disturb them, aware that every step could influence the delicate balance they maintained with the land. He felt an unfamiliar awe, a mixture of respect and caution, as if he had stepped into a story older than the frontier itself, a story that demanded reverence and vigilance in equal measure. And so they moved on, the river at their side, the mist curling around them, the morning light fragile but insistent. The sisters' secrets remained veiled, but their significance pressed against him like the pull of the current, subtle yet undeniable. He understood now that courage alone would not suffice. He would need patience, wisdom, and unwavering resolve to meet the challenges that lay ahead. The river had tested his body, the valley his mind, and the sisters' presence now tested his heart. The mist lifted slowly, curling upward like smoke from a dying fire, revealing more of the river's winding path. Each stone, each ripple in the water, seemed to carry meaning, a subtle language that only the sisters understood. They moved with a quiet confidence now, as though the land itself acknowledged their presence, guiding their steps and offering protection unseen. The frontiersman followed, cautious, aware that he had been thrust into a story larger than himself, a tale woven of danger, reverence, and destiny. The younger sister's eyes sparkled with a mixture of fear and curiosity, reflecting the sunlight that now pierced the fog in delicate shards. She looked to him, seeking reassurance, and he offered a simple nod, the only words he could provide. There was no need for speech. His actions spoke louder than any utterance. He guided her hand gently over uneven rocks, steadying her, anchoring her to the present even as the past and future collided in invisible currents around them. The elder sister paused at a bend in the river, her gaze fixed on the water, as if reading secrets no one else could see. Her fingers traced patterns in the air, subtle and deliberate, a ritual that hummed with ancient knowledge. The frontiersman watched, feeling a shiver run down his spine, sensing that these girls were not merely human in the ordinary sense, but vessels of a legacy that reached deep into the heart of the land and the tribe that revered them. Their sacred lineage pressed against him like a weight, demanding respect, vigilance, and an understanding he had yet to achieve. For the first time, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had saved them from the river's wrath, yes, but what had he truly preserved? Their lives were fragile, but their significance was immense. He realized that every choice he made from this point forward would ripple outward, touching not only the sisters but the tribe, the valley, and the currents of destiny itself. Courage alone had brought him here. Wisdom and moral clarity would be his guides in the trials to come. The wind stirred, carrying a faint scent of pine and wet earth, and the sisters moved with renewed purpose, guiding him through the mist toward a small grove on the riverbank. Sunlight danced across the leaves, glinting off droplets that hung like jewels in the branches. The frontiersman's heart quickened as he sensed the significance of this place, a hidden sanctuary, a threshold between ordinary life and the sacred truths the sisters carried. He stepped lightly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance they maintained with the land, aware that one misstep could unravel more than just physical safety. A soft murmur passed between the sisters, their words melodic and foreign, yet charged with meaning. He did not understand, and yet he understood. The river, the land, and the tribe's traditions were all entwined in these whispers. They spoke of guardianship, of duty, of powers and responsibilities that extended far beyond the narrow scope of survival. He felt both awe and a creeping unease. He had become a participant in a world governed by laws older than his own life, and failure now could carry consequences far graver than death. The river curved sharply, revealing a hidden pool, calm and reflective, its surface almost glass, like in the morning light. The sisters stepped to the water's edge, their reflections mirroring not just themselves but an aura of something sacred, an energy that seemed to pulse through the air. The frontiersman's breath caught. He had faced death in the river's fury, but the weight of this revelation was heavier, more profound. Their presence commanded reverence, and he knew instinctively that his role was no longer that of a passive observer. He was a protector, a witness, and perhaps in some way a participant in the unfolding of their sacred mission. He knelt briefly, letting the sisters move ahead, his hands brushing the wet earth as if grounding himself in the present. Every instinct screamed caution. Every heartbeat reminded him that they were not ordinary children, that their survival carried the potential to shape destinies. And yet he felt a stirring of resolve, a determination to see this path through, to honor the lives he had saved and the responsibilities now placed upon him. The mist began to lift fully, revealing the river's gentle current, the moss-covered stones, and the distant hills, softened by dawn's pale light. The sisters walked ahead, their steps deliberate and ceremonial, as though marking a passage from peril to purpose. The frontiersman followed, understanding that he was no longer merely crossing a valley. He was entering a narrative older than himself, one that demanded courage, respect, and an unwavering commitment to protect what had been entrusted to him. And in that fragile morning, the secret of the sisters became clear. They were not just survivors of a river's fury. They were guardians of a sacred lineage, and his choice to act had bound him irrevocably to their fate. The river had tested his body, the valley his mind, and now the sisters' sacred presence tested his heart. The journey ahead would demand more than courage. It would demand honor, insight, and the steadfastness to confront dangers seen and unseen. The first rays of dawn spread across the tribal lands like molten gold, spilling over the hills and stirring dust from the dry earth. Warriors stirred, their silhouettes rising against the warm light, spears and shields glinting as if the sun itself honored their presence. Flags snapped crisply in the wind, vibrant colors announcing pride, tradition, and vigilance. Somewhere in the distance, a drum beat, a slow, measured cadence that pulsed through the valley, announcing the arrival of destiny. The frontiersmen led the sisters carefully toward the gathering, the weight of their survival now entwined with the eyes of the tribe. Every step carried a silent question. Would they accept him? Could he prove himself worthy of trust, of protection, of brotherhood? His body moved with the certainty of experience, yet his heart thudded with the unfamiliar rhythm of scrutiny. He had faced rivers, storms, and shadows of the past, but this was a test of honor, of principle, of moral courage exposed under the sun and the gaze of a people whose ways he only barely understood. The chief emerged from the center of the assembly, his presence commanding, every gesture deliberate and precise. Eyes dark and penetrating, he observed not only the frontiersmen but the sisters, as if reading the currents that flowed between them. His face, weathered by years and tempered by wisdom, revealed no judgment, only expectation. The air seemed to thrum with tension, a silent weight pressing upon every chest in the clearing. The frontiersman felt it, the pressure of legacy and responsibility, and he squared his shoulders, grounding himself in the only truth he knew. Action demanded integrity, and integrity demanded courage. The chief's gaze settled on the sisters. They remained quiet, eyes lowered slightly, their demeanor a mix of reverence and resilience. He spoke then, voice low and deliberate, the words carrying across the assembly like ripples over still water. They were not a threat, he said, but a responsibility, sacred and delicate, bound to the very identity of the tribe. The frontiersman understood without translation. The choice laid before him was moral and absolute. To falter, to show weakness, was to risk not only his own honor, but the lives of those he had sworn to protect. A hush fell over the warriors as the challenge became clear. The chief would test him, not through combat or threat, but through the measure of his conviction. He would be observed, every hesitation noted, every choice weighed. The frontiersman inhaled the dry, sun-warmed air, tasting dust and sweat and anticipation. He thought of the river, of the storm, of the trembling forms of the sisters whose survival depended now on more than brute strength. They depended on discernment, on moral clarity, on the unwavering commitment of someone who had already chosen to act when action was demanded. He stepped forward, meeting the chief's gaze. The earth beneath him was firm, yet the stakes felt immense, as if the ground itself held the echoes of generations who had tested honor in similar ways. The chief spoke again, words layered with meaning and expectation. Leave the sisters he could have chosen and live unburdened, or protect them, risking all, and demonstrate that courage could coexist with wisdom. The frontiersman's mind moved swiftly, calculating danger, considering morality, acknowledging the sacred weight pressing on his shoulders. Time seemed suspended. The sisters' small hands brushed lightly against each other's, eyes wide but trusting. The frontiersman felt the surge of responsibility, the familiar pulse of fear intertwined with resolve. To act was instinct. To hesitate was betrayal. The eyes of the tribe, the gaze of the river still echoing in memory, the silent weight of his own past, all converged in this single, defining moment. He made his choice, stepping closer to the sisters, guiding them into the safety of his shadow. He positioned himself as both shield and witness. The chief's eyes narrowed slightly, observing the alignment of action and intention. The warriors shifted, some murmuring, yet all watching, the moment suspended on the nigh edge of judgment. He would not abandon them. He would not falter. The river had demanded courage. The valley had demanded wisdom. Now the tribe demanded honor. The first rays of sunlight struck the sisters' hair, illuminating the sacred thread of their lineage, the glow of life preserved, and the frontiersmen understood something vital. Protection was not merely physical. It was moral, spiritual, a testament to the choices one made when every option carried consequence. And in that silent, golden moment, he stepped fully into the test, aware that the path ahead would demand the same unflinching courage that had saved them from the river, now extended to the scrutiny of eyes both mortal and eternal. The chief remained silent for a heartbeat longer, then inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, subtle but seismic. The warriors shifted again, tension releasing in measured increments. The frontiersman exhaled slowly, feeling the first tremor of trust extend toward him, fragile but undeniable. The trial had begun, and he had passed the first measure, to act rightly when hesitation could have been safe. The sisters remained at his side, their presence a quiet affirmation of the choices made, a living reminder of the stakes entwined with honor, duty, and courage. The valley breathed with them, wind stirring the dust and leaves, sunlight glinting off wet stones, and the frontiersman understood the depth of the test yet to unfold. The chief's judgment was not complete, the warrior's scrutiny not fully satisfied, but the first act of courage had been witnessed, and that alone would ripple through the moments to come, shaping the bond between protector and sacred charge. The dust of the valley swirled gently around their feet, sunlight catching in the fine grains like golden sparks. The warriors remained still, their eyes sharp and unyielding, yet the tension in the air shifted subtly, as though the land itself held its breath. The frontiersman's chest rose and fell steadily, each inhale a tether to the moment, each exhale a release of fear, replacing it with resolve. The test had begun, but the deeper trials, the ones that would shape not only his fate but the fate of the sacred sisters, still lay ahead. The chief stepped forward, his presence commanding without intimidation. He spoke now, voice low and precise, weaving a challenge that was as much about morality as it was about courage. "They are yours to protect," he said, each word weighted with the authority of generations. But protection is more than defense. It is choice, sacrifice, and the willingness to bear burdens not your own. The frontiersman nodded, understanding the layers of meaning. This was no mere acknowledgment of bravery. It was a measure of integrity, of moral clarity, of the courage to act when every path carried risk. The sisters shifted closer to him, small hands brushing his coat in silent gratitude and reliance. Their eyes, wide and luminous, held the weight of hidden knowledge, of sacred lineage, of destinies entwined with the land and tribe. He felt it keenly. The river had tested his body, the valley had tested his mind, and now their presence tested his heart. Every choice mattered, every hesitation would be seen, every instinct measured against the scale of honor. The warriors began to circle, not menacingly, but with the deliberate rhythm of scrutiny. Their steps were soft on the dry earth, yet each echoed with the history of countless trials, countless acts of courage and cowardice that had shaped the tribe's understanding of worth. The frontiersman moved deliberately, each step measured, careful, yet infused with the certainty of purpose. He guided the sisters, steadying their footing, shielding them from unseen hazards, demonstrating without words that his actions aligned with his intentions. The chief's eyes never left him, observing the alignment of thought and deed, the subtleties of posture and gesture, the quiet courage that flowed beneath every action. The sisters' sacred energy seemed to ripple outward, subtle yet undeniable, illuminating the moral gravity of the moment. The frontiersman felt it pressing upon him, a current stronger than any river, heavier than any storm, compelling him to rise to a standard higher than his own. A sudden gust of wind rustled the flags, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine, and he felt a shiver run through him, not of fear, but of recognition. He understood now that the test was not merely survival, not merely protection, but the demonstration of moral resolve under scrutiny. To falter, to hesitate, to act selfishly or recklessly would jeopardize not only the sisters but the fragile trust he had begun to earn. The sisters glanced at him, a silent affirmation, their trust anchoring him in the moment. He exhaled slowly, centering himself, and allowed instinct to guide action. His hands moved with certainty, gestures of protection and guidance that conveyed more than words ever could. He aligned the sisters behind him, positioning himself as the shield, as the moral and physical anchor. Every fiber of his being responded to the challenge, every choice a declaration. He would not abandon them, he would not waver, he would honor the sacred bond he had formed. The chief inclined his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, a subtle acknowledgment of integrity and courage. The warriors shifted, murmuring softly among themselves, the first threads of trust weaving through the assembly. The frontiersman did not allow himself relief, only focus. The test was ongoing, its demands far from complete. Yet in that quiet, golden moment, he felt the stirrings of connection, the fragile recognition of acceptance by those whose judgment mattered most. The sisters' small hands remained lightly on his coat, their presence a constant reminder of the responsibility now fully claimed. The frontiersman's gaze swept the valley, sunlight glinting off wet stones and rippling water, wind lifting dust into fleeting patterns of light. He understood that the chief's test was more than observation. It was a living trial, a moral crucible, a proving of character through action. Courage had brought him this far, but honor and integrity would carry him through what lay ahead. As the first golden rays touched the river's edge, illuminating the sacred lineage of the sisters, he felt a deep, quiet certainty settle over him. The river had tested his body, the storm his instinct, the valley his mind, and now the tribe's gaze tested his heart. He was no longer merely a man of survival. He was a man of choice, responsibility, and unwavering moral resolve. And in that moment he knew he would not falter, for the sacred bond he had formed demanded nothing less. The valley breathed with them, wind-stirring leaves, flags snapping in rhythm with the heartbeat of the land, and the frontiersman felt the first real weight of belonging. The chief's test was not yet complete, the warrior's scrutiny not fully satisfied, but he had proven something vital, that courage guided by conscience could bridge the distance between outsider and brother, protector and sacred charge. And with that, the stage was set for the trials yet to come, the hidden threats waiting beyond the veil of valley and river, the choices that would test every fiber of his being, and the destiny that now intertwined him irrevocably with the sacred sisters he had sworn to protect. The valley lay in a fragile calm, deceptive in its serenity. The river flowed quietly now, its earlier fury reduced to gentle murmurs over smooth stones. Mist clung to low, lying grass, and the air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. Yet beneath this quiet, something lurked, shadows that twisted in the folds of canyons, movement too subtle to name, but enough to awaken instinctive unease. The frontiersman felt it immediately, a prickling along his spine, a whisper in the air warning that safety was temporary, fleeting, fragile. The sisters walked closely beside him, their small hands brushing his coat with silent assurance. They had grown more confident, more deliberate, yet their expressions held a flicker of tension, as though they could sense danger unseen. The frontiersman's eyes scanned the canyon edges, noting the subtle shifts of light and shadow, the movement of rocks displaced by unseen feet, the rustle of leaves betraying life that should not have been there. He knew then that the valley's calm was an illusion. A threat had emerged, patient, cunning, waiting for the opportune moment. High above, in the shadowed cliffs, figures moved with deliberate precision. The rival faction, intent on claiming what the sisters represented, watched the valley like predators assessing their prey. The frontiersman sensed their presence before he could see them clearly. A sudden silence among birds, a faint gust of wind carrying the scent of smoke from distant torches, a subtle tension in the land itself. Danger was near, woven into the very air, and it carried a cruel intelligence. The sisters' sacred significance made them targets, and the moment of confrontation was approaching faster than he could anticipate. He guided the sisters to a narrow ledge above the river where rocks jutted like jagged teeth from the earth. The sisters obeyed without question, their movements cautious, precise, almost ritualistic. The frontiersman's eyes never left the canyon edges, his hands taut, muscles ready, heart steady with the disciplined anticipation of a man who had faced death before, yet understood that this threat was unlike any river, any storm. This was human cunning, moral corruption, a will to harm that required not brute strength alone, but cunning, vigilance, and foresight. A flicker of movement caught his attention, a shadow slipping behind a rock formation, then another, then a subtle gleam of metal reflecting sunlight. The rival faction had begun their advance, silent, deliberate, their intentions clear to him now. The sisters' sacred power made them a prize, and the frontiersman's intervention would ignite conflict far beyond the quiet valley. The tension tightened around him like a vice, awareness sharpened to a razor's edge. One misstep, one hesitation, and the consequences would be catastrophic. The sisters glanced at him, eyes wide, unspoken questions passing between them. He did not speak. Words were unnecessary. His steady presence, the careful placement of hands, the guiding movement through the terrain, all spoke volumes. Protection, vigilance, courage. These were the language they understood. He would shield them, guide them, and confront whatever threat had emerged from the shadows. The canyon's shadows seemed to lengthen, carrying whispers of strategy and deceit. The frontiersman's mind moved quickly, anticipating movement, reading the landscape like an open book. Every rock, every slope, every flicker of light could conceal danger. The sisters' sacred importance was undeniable, and he felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever. The river had tested his body, the valley his resolve, and now the hidden threat tested his instincts and judgment. Suddenly, a stone skittered across the ledge, a warning, deliberate and calculated. The frontiersman dropped to a crouch, pressing the sisters behind him. His eyes traced the canyon walls, noting shapes and shadows that blended seamlessly with the rocky terrain. The rival faction was clever, patient, their intent unmistakable: to capture, to control, to disrupt the delicate balance he had fought to preserve. The sisters' survival now demanded more than vigilance. It demanded strategy, courage, and unflinching determination. A gust of wind stirred dust and leaves, carrying faint whispers of movement. The frontiersman's muscles tensed, every sense aligned to the threat. He was a sentinel in this quiet, deceptive calm, a living shield against forces that would not hesitate to strike. And the sisters, small yet sacred, remained close, their trust a silent anchor, their presence a reminder that the stakes had never been higher. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the canyon edges in harsh light that revealed both beauty and menace. The rival faction's intentions were now visible in fleeting glimpses. Quick steps, glinting metal, shadowed eyes assessing vulnerabilities. The frontiersman's mind worked swiftly, mapping every route, every escape, every possible tactic. Courage had carried him this far, but cunning and resolve would be required to face the danger that loomed like a living shadow. He pressed forward carefully, leading the sisters along the ledge, moving with deliberate steps that avoided unnecessary exposure. Every rock, every patch of grass, every glint of sunlight became part of the battlefield he could not yet fight openly. Awareness became survival, vigilance became instinct, and instinct became his only guide as the hidden threat crept ever closer, patient and relentless, determined to strike at the sacred lineage he had vowed to protect. The valley's calm was gone. In its place, tension coiled like a living thing, wrapping the land, the river, and the three of them in a silent promise. The danger had arrived, and the test of courage, protection, and moral clarity was about to begin in earnest. The shadows shifted with deliberate precision, slipping between rocks and brush like whispers of intent. The rival faction moved closer, unseen but sensed, their presence a silent blade against the valley's fragile calm. The frontiersman's eyes swept the terrain, trained to detect even the faintest tremor, the slightest displacement of stone or leaf. He felt the gravity of what lay ahead. This was not mere mischief or idle threat. This was treachery, patient, cunning, and lethal. The sisters pressed closer, small hands gripping his coat with instinctive trust. Their sacred significance was the prize, and he understood that the weight of their survival now rested on strategy, vigilance, and the precision of every action. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying hints of movement and the faint metallic glint of weapons. Danger was close, tangible, and deliberate. He crouched behind a jagged rock, calculating the rival faction's next move. Each shadow held potential peril. Each flicker of light could reveal an ambush. His mind raced, mapping the canyon as both battlefield and sanctuary, aware that the sisters' lineage made them targets far beyond mere human desire. Their importance extended into the heart of the tribe, into traditions and histories he was only beginning to understand. To fail here would not only endanger life, it would disrupt the sacred balance they carried. A sudden rustle, sharper this time, alerted him to movement above. He glanced up, catching glimpses of figures poised with intent. They were silent, efficient, their tactics deliberate. The frontiersman's muscles coiled, ready to act. He shifted subtly, positioning the sisters where they were shielded by rock and shadow, each movement precise. A language of protection they instinctively understood. Then the first strike came. Not a shout, not a charge, but a calculated attempt to unsettle. A loose rock skittered down the canyon edge, bouncing and clattering in the still morning. The frontiersman caught it reflexively, twisting to shield the sisters as if they were extensions of his own being. The sound echoed, drawing attention, and for the first time, the enemy's presence became undeniable. Figures emerged, their faces hidden, intentions clear, advancing with measured, predatory patience. The frontiersman rose slightly, chest forward, hands ready, eyes scanning every shadow. He could not simply fight blindly. The canyon offered risk at every turn. He needed leverage, advantage, a way to channel the threat without endangering those he had sworn to protect. The sisters' trust weighed heavily on him, their silent reliance a tether to both courage and wisdom. He could not fail, not now, not ever. Suddenly, a figure broke from the shadows, moving quickly toward the sisters with deliberate menace. The frontiersman lunged, intercepting with the speed of instinct, hands gripping firmly yet with care. The clash was brief but intense, a silent struggle that revealed the stakes. This was not mere violence. It was a battle for sacred survival. The sisters watched, wide-eyed yet calm, as if witnessing the unfolding of a preordained tale. The rival faction regrouped, eyes calculating, strategies shifting, and the frontiersmen realized the scope of betrayal. This was not an isolated act. There was a network of intent, a deliberate plot to seize, harm, or manipulate what the sisters represented. The sacred lineage, the fragile trust of the valley, the bonds forged in courage, they were all at risk. And he alone stood as the shield, the moral anchor, the defender against forces that would not hesitate to corrupt or destroy. He moved with deliberate precision, guiding the sisters along a safer path. Eyes sharp for every shadow, every rustle, every subtle signal of intent. The canyon became a chessboard, each step a calculation, each movement a statement of resolve. Courage alone had carried him this far, but now vigilance, wisdom, and moral clarity were his weapons. Every decision mattered, every pause could cost lives. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the canyon edges, casting harsh light on potential threats and revealing the enemy's cunning. The frontiersman pressed on, leading the sisters with steady hands, unwavering gaze, and a heart tempered by the river, the storm, and the moral weight of responsibility. The hidden threat was real, immediate, and lethal, yet he faced it without hesitation, guided by principle as much as instinct. As the river whispered below and the canyon shadows lengthened, he understood a profound truth. Bravery without discernment could falter, courage without vigilance could fail, and yet, in the crucible of danger, the alignment of heart, mind, and action could overcome even the most insidious threat. The sisters' sacred lineage, their trust, and the fragile bond he had formed demanded nothing less than total commitment. And in that tense, silent moment, with the rival faction closing, the valley holding its breath, and the river murmuring its ancient song, the frontiersman steeled himself. He would confront the betrayal, navigate the peril, and defend the sacred charge entrusted to him. The hidden threat was here, and so was he, unyielding, unwavering, prepared to meet it with every fiber of his being. The storm returned with a ferocity the valley had not felt in years. Clouds rolled across the sky like molten iron, thick and suffocating, carrying the promise of rain and chaos. The river, once calm and reflective, surged with renewed fury, frothing white against jagged rocks as if echoing the tension that had been building along its banks. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the canyon in stark, blinding flashes, and thunder followed immediately, a rolling drum of nature's wrath. The frontiersman moved with deliberate urgency, guiding the sisters along a narrow ledge above the river. Water splashed and hissed below, each wave a reminder of the peril they had narrowly escaped before, each ripple a mirror of the danger now stalking them on land. The rival faction had emerged fully from the shadows, their intentions clear, their weapons glinting like shards of cold steel. Treachery had taken form, and the valley would soon be baptized in fire, blood, and the raw test of courage. The sisters' small hands clung to his coat, but their faces, though young, carried a maturity that belied their years. They had seen fear, they had felt danger, and yet they trusted him utterly. That trust was both anchor and burden, a moral weight pressing on his shoulders even as adrenaline surged through his veins. Every step, every decision could tip the balance between life and death, between survival and sacrifice. The first clash erupted along the canyon edge. A figure leaped from the rocks, a weapon raised with lethal precision. The frontiersman intercepted, deflecting the strike with raw strength and calculated timing. Stone met metal with a ringing clash that echoed across the valley, a warning and a declaration all at once. The river roared below, rushing like a living force, a parallel to the battle above it. Every drop of water seemed charged with the same urgency, the same intensity as the struggle on the rocks. He fought with controlled fury, each movement a dance of instinct and strategy. The sisters huddled behind him when necessary, yet even in their proximity, their sacred presence radiated power, demanding respect and caution. He understood that brute strength alone would not suffice. The rival faction was cunning, coordinated, and relentless. Victory would require not only courage but careful orchestration, the fusion of physical prowess and moral clarity. A second wave surged. The rival faction's numbers pressed against them, pushing the limits of endurance and skill. The frontiersmen parried, dodged, and struck, always mindful of the sisters, always aware of the jagged terrain, the slippery stones, the river's hungry rush below. Every moment carried the potential for catastrophe, yet he moved with a rhythm born of necessity, honed by previous trials, tempered by the moral imperative of his charge. Lightning flashed again, revealing the full scope of the battlefield. The river churned violently, and the canyon's shadows became alive with motion. Figures advanced with deadly intent, their faces masks of determination, their eyes reflecting the greed for power, for control over the sacred lineage the sisters embodied. The frontiersman's resolve hardened. He would not yield, he would not falter. The river had demanded courage, the valley had demanded wisdom, and now the battle demanded unwavering honor. Amid the chaos, he sensed subtle shifts in the enemy's approach, patterns that revealed strategy beneath the aggression. He directed the sisters with quick gestures, guiding them to higher ground, shielding them behind rocks, using the terrain to their advantage. The river's roar below became a symphony of tension, a constant reminder that the forces of nature and man now conspired against them. Each moment was fraught with peril. Each decision carried irreversible weight. The first injuries fell. A warrior's cry rang out, sharp and brief, swallowed quickly by thunder. The river shimmered red in the reflection of the storm, an omen and a metaphor, the violent proof that the valley demanded sacrifice for those who dared to protect the sacred. Yet through the tumult, the frontiersman moved with clarity, guided by instinct, principle, and the unyielding determination to ensure the sisters' survival. Every clash, every flash of steel, every roar of the river reinforced the reality. This was no ordinary battle. This was a test of endurance, courage, and the moral courage to act when all forces conspired to paralyze action. The storm, the river, the treachery, the sacred charge, all converged into a single crucible of danger, demanding every ounce of skill, insight, and courage the frontiersman possessed. And through it all, the sisters remained close, their presence a quiet affirmation, their trust an unspoken vow. He fought not merely for survival, but for legacy, for honor, for the sacred duty that now defined every heartbeat, every movement, every breath. The river of blood had begun to flow, and he would stand resolute amidst its currents, unyielding, unbroken, a guardian against forces that sought to destroy what was most sacred. The storm's fury intensified, rain lashing sideways against jagged cliffs. the river below swelling into a frothing, merciless torrent. Each flash of lightning revealed the valley in stark, chaotic brilliance. Warriors clashing, weapons gleaming, and shadows twisting like living threats across the rocky terrain. The frontiersman's muscles burned with effort, every movement precise, every choice a matter of life and death. The rival faction pressed harder, their attacks coordinated, relentless, their faces set with grim determination. But the frontiersmen met them with unyielding focus. Every block, every strike, every maneuver was calculated to protect the sisters while turning the tide of the assault. He had learned from the river's fury, the storm's wrath, the hidden threats that had stalked them. The valley had prepared him for this crucible. The sisters clung to him when needed, yet even amidst chaos, their presence radiated an almost sacred calm. He sensed their awareness, subtle but profound, a quiet force that bolstered his resolve. Their lineage carried weight beyond the eyes of men, and he knew that his protection extended not just to flesh and blood, but to something older, something sacred. Every step he took was a declaration. He would not fail, he would not falter. A sudden surge of the river sent a wave crashing against the rocks, splintering trees and sending mud sliding down the slopes. The warriors scrambled for balance, some losing footing, others narrowly avoiding the grasp of the raging water. The frontiersmen moved with lightning reflexes, shielding the sisters, pulling them to higher, more stable ground. Nature itself had become part of the battlefield, the river a living, violent participant, as if echoing the stakes of the human struggle above it. The rival faction regrouped, eyes narrowing, teeth gritted, weapons raised with renewed determination. One advanced from the rear, attempting a flanking maneuver, but the frontiersman anticipated the move. He intercepted with brutal precision, striking not with malice but necessity, ensuring the sisters remained untouched. Sparks of metal against stone, the hiss of weapons cutting air, and the roar of thunder created a symphony of chaos, each note punctuating the intensity of the fight. Blood mingled with rain on the stones, staining earth and water alike. Yet through the carnage, the frontiersman maintained focus, every motion guided by instinct and unwavering moral clarity. Survival was not enough. Protection demanded courage, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Each fallen opponent was a reminder of stakes higher than personal safety. The sacred trust of the sisters, the honor demanded by the valley, and the moral imperative to act decisively. Lightning illuminated a distant figure moving with calculated menace, a commander of the rival faction, orchestrating the assault with cruel precision. The frontiersman's gaze locked onto him, recognizing the epicenter of the treachery. Every strike, every maneuver from the enemy now seemed part of a single, horrifying design, to overpower, to capture, to claim what the sisters represented. He would not allow it. The river surged again, water roaring with a deafening, almost sentient intensity, as if to challenge the frontiersman's resolve. But he stood firm, a living bastion, a shield against both human and natural forces. The sisters' hands remained on his coat, anchoring him, reminding him that this fight was not only for survival, but for preservation, for honor, for the sacred lineage he had sworn to defend. The storm reached its zenith, lightning striking near the canyon edges, thunder shaking the cliffs, and wind lashing like blades. The rival faction's advance was relentless, yet the frontiersman moved with the clarity of purpose that only true commitment can grant. He guided, struck, defended, and adapted, every action a declaration that he would not yield, that courage guided by moral resolve could overcome even the most insidious force. Finally, a fleeting pause, a momentary stillness amid chaos. Both sides measured, recalculated, the storm itself offering a brief, trembling respite. The frontiersman's chest heaved, drenched, bloodied, yet unbroken. The sister's eyes met his, luminous with trust and quiet recognition. He understood then that the river, the storm, the enemy, they had all tested his strength, but his resolve had not wavered. Courage and moral clarity had prevailed in this crucible of violence. Yet the battle was far from over. The river had tested his body, the storm his instincts, and now the enemy's cunning tested his mind. The valley still held secrets, the hidden threats still lurked, and the next steps demanded the same unyielding courage, the same moral fortitude that had carried him through the river of blood. The fight had begun, but the war for honor, protection, and sacred trust had only just reached its peak. The valley was bathed in fire, orange light as the sun sank behind jagged cliffs, casting long shadows that merged with smoke and dust rising from the battlefield. Every stone, every tree, every ripple of the river seemed charged with the aftermath of chaos. The air carried the acrid tang of blood, wet earth, and sweat, a testament to struggle and sacrifice. Frontiersman stood among the remnants of the conflict, rain and mud streaking his face, muscles taut with exhaustion, yet his eyes were unwavering, sharp, and resolute. Across the valley, the mastermind of the rival faction emerged. Cloaked in shadow yet exuding authority, his movements deliberate, his gaze cold and calculating, this was the architect of treachery, the source of betrayal that had threatened the sacred sisters, the valley, and the fragile trust forged through courage and honor. The frontiersman's jaw tightened, every fiber of his being braced for confrontation, not only of strength but of moral and strategic clarity. The sisters stood slightly behind him, their hands lightly touching his coat, their eyes reflecting fear, awe, and quiet trust. Their sacred lineage was the prize, the reason the mastermind had orchestrated chaos, and the frontiersman understood the stakes. Failure here would cost more than life. It would unravel honor, tradition, and the fragile peace of the valley. The river, still churning with memory of violence, murmured beneath the cliffs as if reminding them all of the cost of conflict. A tense silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of fires smoldering in the battlefield's wake. Dust swirled in the dying light, catching on sharp edges of stone and weapon alike, creating illusions of movement that heightened the suspense. Then a subtle shift, a calculated step forward from the mastermind, signaled the reckoning was at hand. Every heartbeat echoed in the frontiersman's chest, each a drumbeat of courage and resolve. The first strike came suddenly, a blur of motion, a weapon raised with lethal precision. The frontiersman intercepted with practiced reflex, steel clashing against steel, a resounding echo across the valley. Sparks flew, eyes met, and in that instant it was not mere combat. It was a test of moral clarity, a confrontation of wills, a battle for justice as much as survival. The sisters watched, died but composed, their presence anchoring him. Each motion of the frontiersman was deliberate, a fusion of instinct and strategy, bravery and intellect. The mastermind pressed, relentless, skilled, but the frontiersman adapted, countering not only with strength, but with foresight, predicting movements, reading intentions. This was more than a fight. It was the culmination of trials, the merging of courage and honor into decisive action. The clash intensified, echoing off cliffs and river, a symphony of violence punctuated by flashes of lightning still lingering in the sky. Each strike, each parry, carried weight beyond the immediate moment. Each movement was a declaration of principle. The frontiersman was not merely defending himself or the sisters. He was defending the moral integrity of every choice that had brought them to this point, the honor that had been tested in river, storm, and shadow. The mastermind lunged again, ferocity in his movements, but the frontiersman anticipated, sidestepped, and delivered a precise counter, disarming the opponent without unnecessary cruelty. The battle became a dance of skill, a contest not just of muscle, but of intellect, moral clarity, and courage tempered by responsibility. The sisters' presence, sacred and unyielding, infused him with purpose, their trust a living force guiding his actions. A final pause, momentary yet electric, stretched across the valley. Both men measured, calculated, understanding that the next move would decide more than victory. It would decide honor, justice, and the legacy of courage that had guided every step thus far. Dust and smoke swirled, sunlight faded into twilight, and the river murmured its ancient song, a witness to the culmination of trials, the unfolding of reckoning. In that charged stillness, the frontiersman felt the alignment of instinct, strategy, and moral clarity. He moved with certainty, striking decisively, forcing the mastermind into retreat. Every motion was precise, every decision moral as much as tactical, and the valley seemed to exhale, the tension lifting slightly yet leaving the echoes of justice resounding in stone, river, and air. The sisters stepped forward slightly, eyes luminous with reverence and gratitude. The frontiersman's chest heaved with exertion, yet his gaze remained steady, unbroken. The reckoning had begun, and in this first phase justice had been meted, courage had been proven, and the valley bore witness to the power of unwavering moral resolve. Yet the battle was not entirely over. Shadows still lingered, the mastermind's cunning still whispered in the wind, and the valley held the tension of unfinished trials. The reckoning had begun, but the true measure of courage, honor, and moral clarity would continue to unfold in the moments just ahead, demanding vigilance, strategy, and unyielding commitment. The valley trembled under the weight of impending resolution. Dust and smoke rose from scorched earth, mingling with the last streaks of fire, orange sunlight as it bled into twilight. The river below, now calm but still churning with memory, mirrored the battlefield's scars, swirling patterns of red and silver, testament to struggle and sacrifice. The frontiersman's gaze remained locked on the mastermind, whose every step radiated cold calculation, defiance, and unrepentant cunning. The sisters stood close, their presence a quiet, sacred force, steadying him, reminding him of what was at stake. The mastermind advanced again, his movements measured, precise, intending not merely to overpower but to assert dominance, to seize control over the sacred lineage the sisters embodied. But the frontiersman was ready, tempered by storms, tested by treachery, honed by every peril he had endured. Courage alone had brought him here, but strategy and moral clarity would determine the valley's fate. They clashed. Steel rang against steel, echoing through the canyon like a chorus of thunder. Each strike carried history, morality, and consequence. Every dodge, every counter, was guided by instinct, experience, and the weight of responsibility. The mastermind struck with ruthless skill, but the frontiersman responded with the calm decisiveness of a man who had faced death, loss, and betrayal, and had emerged unbroken, carrying the fire of unwavering principle. The sisters watched, their eyes wide, reflecting fear and awe, yet calm in the face of chaos. Their sacred lineage pulsed like a silent force, guiding the frontiersman's actions, shaping the confrontation in ways unseen but deeply felt. Every motion became more than defense. It became statement, moral assertion, proof that courage aligned with integrity could withstand even the most insidious adversary. The climax approached. The mastermind faltered for the first time, misjudging the valley's terrain and the frontiersman's resolve. Seizing the moment, the frontiersman acted decisively, disarming the foe and forcing him to his knees, every motion deliberate, controlled, and righteous. Victory was not marked by cruelty, but by justice, a moral reckoning executed with clarity and honor. The valley held its breath as the final confrontation played out, nature itself seeming to pause in reverent silence. The mastermind's defiance faltered under the weight of unyielding principle. He could strike no further, command no loyalty in the face of moral clarity embodied by the frontiersman. The sisters stepped forward, their hands brushing lightly against the protector, their sacred aura acknowledging the fulfillment of justice. The river whispered below, a quiet, flowing testament to trials endured and honor maintained. The valley exhaled. The dust settled slowly, revealing scars of conflict, but also the resilience of courage tested and proven. The frontiersman's chest heaved with exertion, muscles trembling, yet his gaze remained steady, unwavering. Justice had been delivered, not with malice, not with vengeance, but with clarity, courage, and moral purpose. And in that twilight, as the last streaks of sun faded and shadows lengthened across the valley, the frontiersman understood the profound truth of the moment. Courage alone is fleeting, honor alone is hollow. Only when courage is bound to principle, and bravery guided by moral clarity, can justice prevail in a world fraught with chaos, betrayal, and peril. The sister's sacred presence radiated around him, a quiet acknowledgement that the valley, the river, and the people within it were safe once more. The reckoning was complete, yet the lessons endured. The balance between courage, strategy, and morality could tip the fate of all, and the measure of a man was found not merely in survival, but in the unwavering pursuit of what was right. The sun finally sank behind the cliffs, leaving the valley cloaked in twilight, calm yet alive with memory. The frontiersman lowered his stance, eyes sweeping the terrain one last time, aware that vigilance would always be necessary, but heartened that justice, for this moment, had been served. The river whispered beneath the cliffs, reflecting the first glimmers of peace after the storm, and the valley exhaled, a living testament to courage, integrity, and the power of unwavering moral resolve. The first light of morning seeped over the horizon, soft and golden, brushing the valley with warmth after nights of storm and strife. The river, once wild and roaring, now flowed calmly, reflecting the gentle blush of dawn across its surface. Mist hovered like a delicate veil over the riverbanks, curling and twisting with the breath of the morning wind. Silence stretched across the valley, broken only by distant birdsong and the soft murmur of water. The frontiersman stood tall, shoulders heavy with fatigue yet unbowed, watching the valley awaken. The sisters were beside him, their presence calm, sacred, and serene. They had survived the tempest, the hidden threats, and the river's wrath, and now the valley itself seemed to acknowledge their endurance. Every leaf, every ripple, every whisper of the wind bore witness to the trials endured and the courage displayed. From the distant ridge, figures appeared, warriors of the tribe, moving with solemn purpose, the dust of travel rising in their wake. Their eyes were focused, respectful, yet curious, measuring the man who had faced storms, rival factions, and impossible odds, all to protect what was most sacred. The frontiersman remained still, understanding that recognition was not earned through words or claims, but through deeds demonstrated under fire, courage tested and proven. The chief emerged, riding slowly on a strong, steady horse, the morning light catching the edges of his ceremonial cloak and the silver glint of his insignia. His gaze swept over the river, the valley, the sisters, and finally rested on the frontiersman. Silence held between them, heavy, reverent, and potent. The air carried the weight of unspoken judgment, the acknowledgement of trials endured, the recognition of honor maintained. Then, with deliberate solemnity, the chief dismounted and approached. The frontiersman did not bow, did not lower his gaze. His deeds had already spoken. The sisters stepped slightly forward, their hands brushing lightly against his coat, a subtle affirmation of their trust and the sacred bond now woven between protector and protected. The chief's voice, deep and resonant, carried across the valley. It was not loud, but it was filled with authority and acknowledgement. He spoke of courage, of honor, of the trials faced in the river, the storm, and the shadowed ambushes. Every word was a testament to moral clarity, to bravery that had transcended mere survival, to a heart that acted when others hesitated. The frontiersman listened, understanding that this moment was both an ending and a beginning, the close of immediate danger and the birth of a bond forged in courage and principle. The warriors behind the chief echoed the acknowledgement with subtle gestures, heads bowed slightly, weapons lowered, eyes reflecting trust and respect. The valley seemed to exhale, the river's soft murmur harmonizing with the unspoken celebration of integrity and courage. The frontiersman's chest rose and fell with steady breath, feeling the weight of recognition, the quiet affirmation that the tribe now embraced him, not merely as a protector, but as a brother, bound by deeds and honor, a moral ally in a land of constant challenge. The sisters' eyes shone in the soft light, their sacred presence blending with the warmth of the dawn. They had survived, yes, but more than that. They had recognized the unwavering dedication of the man who had stood against storms, treachery, and death itself to ensure their safety. Their lineage remained intact, honored and protected, and in that protection, a new chapter for the valley, the river, and the tribe was born. The wind shifted gently, carrying whispers of past storms and promises of future peace. The frontiersman felt it in his bones. The valley, the river, the tribe, and the sisters all acknowledging a new equilibrium, a new bond. Brotherhood was not claimed through words, it was forged in courage, tempered in trials, and solidified through unwavering moral resolve. And as the first golden rays of sunrise painted the valley in warmth and serenity, the frontiersman allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Every storm weathered, every enemy faced, every peril survived had led to this dawn, this quiet affirmation, this recognition of brotherhood that transcended blood, tribe, and fear. The morning sun climbed higher, spilling light across the valley, gilding the river in a path of gold that shimmered and danced over the rippling surface. Mist lifted slowly, revealing the scars of the past days, the jagged stones, trampled earth, and splintered trees, but the air was now filled with quiet renewal. The frontiersman moved among the tribe, the sisters walking beside him, their steps light, eyes luminous, their sacred presence grounding the fragile peace that had been hard won. The warriors gathered around, their expressions a mixture of respect, awe, and relief. The air vibrated with the unspoken acknowledgement that the man who had faced storm, river, and treachery was no longer an outsider, no longer merely a solitary protector. He had proven himself not through force alone, but through courage bound to principle, through deeds that demanded recognition. Brotherhood had been earned in sweat, blood, and unwavering moral clarity. The chief approached once more, this time with a subtle smile, his voice low and reverent. He spoke of trust forged in peril, of courage tempered by honor, of deeds that transcended survival and touched the sacred. The words carried weight, resonating through the valley, the river, and the hearts of all who listened. The frontiersman acknowledged the tribute with a humble nod, understanding that true recognition required no speech, only steadfast action. The sisters stepped forward, their hands gently resting on the frontiersman's arm, eyes meeting his with quiet affirmation. Their lineage, once endangered, now stood protected, a sacred trust reaffirmed through loyalty, courage, and unshakable resolve. In their presence, he felt the weight of responsibility ease slightly, replaced with the gentle assurance that the bond he had formed with them and the tribe was enduring, sacred, and recognized. The valley itself seemed to respond. The river flowed clear and steady, birds sang with renewed vigor, and a soft wind carried away the remnants of smoke and dust from battle. The world exhaled, and with it came the sense of balance restored, trust reaffirmed, and purpose solidified. Frontiersman's shoulders relaxed just enough to feel the depth of the moment, the quiet triumph of honor preserved and lives protected. He walked slowly along the riverbank, the sisters at his side, feeling the morning sun warm his face and dry the remnants of storm-soaked clothing. Every step was a meditation, a reflection on trials overcome, threats faced, and the sacred duty fulfilled. The warriors watched, the tribe acknowledged, and the valley embraced this new chapter of unity, respect, and mutual understanding. The chief raised his hand in a gesture of final recognition. It was subtle yet profound, a declaration to all assembled. The frontiersman was now a brother in spirit, a guardian of the sacred, and a living testament to courage guided by principle. No ceremony could match the authenticity of deeds executed under fire, and here, in the valley bathed in golden morning light, the act of brotherhood needed no embellishment. The sisters smiled faintly, their eyes reflecting both gratitude and awe, their sacred presence merging seamlessly with the hero who had risked all for them. The river whispered at their feet, a flowing testament to the bond forged not by words but by courage, by moral resolve, and by the willingness to act when all else faltered. The valley seemed to hold its breath in acknowledgement, nature itself affirming the unity that had been earned through sacrifice, trust, and unwavering honor. And as the frontiersmen and the sisters paused to look across the river, the sun fully illuminating the valley's rebirth, a profound quiet settled over the scene. Brotherhood had been affirmed, trust solidified, and the sacred mission secured. The hero had earned his place, not merely among the tribe, but within the heart of the valley itself, where courage, principle, and honor converged to create something enduring and timeless. The valley breathed again. Morning sunlight stretched across fertile fields, touching every blade of grass, every stone, every leaf with warmth and life. The river, once a churning menace, now flowed clear and steady, its gentle current whispering across smooth stones and fallen branches, carrying the memory of storms past and the promise of renewal. The frontiersman walked along its banks, boots sinking slightly in damp earth, every step a quiet meditation on the scars left behind and the work yet to be done. The sisters moved beside him, their sacred presence infusing the valley with calm and reverence. They observed the damage wrought by flood and conflict, the trampled crops, scattered debris, splintered trees, and yet their eyes held hope, a recognition that even in destruction there was the possibility of restoration. Their lineage had survived, and now the land itself was waiting to be tended, healed, and restored. The warriors of the tribe worked steadily, clearing debris, repairing fences, guiding livestock back to safe pastures. Their movements were purposeful, each action a contribution to recovery, each gesture a reflection of trust earned in battle and honor witnessed in courage. The frontiersman joined them where needed, his hands roughened by effort, his muscles still humming from previous struggles, yet his spirit centered on renewal rather than strife. Birdsong returned, a soft melody that threaded through the valley, weaving between the sighing river and the rustle of leaves in gentle wind. The frontiersman paused for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the pulse of life slowly returning to the land. Every tree restored, every stream cleared, every field replanted was a testament to the resilience of nature and the persistence of human endeavor guided by principle. The sisters knelt at the riverbank, cupping water in their hands, letting it flow over stones and fingers, a symbolic gesture of cleansing and renewal. Their sacred lineage intertwined with the land itself, reinforcing the harmony that had been disrupted by storm, flood, and treachery. The frontiersman watched, a quiet pride and profound respect settling over him. Protecting them had been his duty, but aiding the land's recovery was his choice. His ongoing commitment to the balance of the valley he now called home. Together they worked in silent coordination. Fallen branches were cleared, saplings planted along eroded banks, and paths once lost to flood were rebuilt. Each act of restoration was deliberate, a quiet battle against time, decay, and neglect. Sweat mingled with soil, rain still clinging to hair and clothing, yet a sense of purpose thrummed in every motion, a heartbeat of renewal echoing across the valley. The frontiersman paused to examine a stretch of riverbank where the flood had gouged deep into the earth. He knelt, pressing hands into the soil, feeling its texture, its resilience. The river's whispers carried lessons of patience, persistence, and the necessity of careful guidance. He understood then that healing the land was inseparable from healing the people, from honoring the sacred trust he had fought to preserve. As the sun climbed higher, its light warming the valley, the frontiersman saw signs of progress. Grass began to re-emerge along worn paths, streams ran clearer, and wildlife cautiously returned to edges once abandoned. The river reflected the sunlight in glimmers that danced like tiny fires across its surface, a celebration of survival, endurance, and careful stewardship. The sisters walked beside him again, their eyes scanning the fields with satisfaction, their presence radiating gratitude and quiet pride. Together, they represented a living promise that sacred trust, courage, and care could restore not only lives but the very land itself. The valley, scarred but resilient, mirrored the frontiersman's journey, a testament to courage tempered by wisdom, bravery guided by principle, and the unshakable bond formed through trials endured. The valley, once scarred by river and conflict, now glimmered with quiet promise. Sunlight poured across newly replanted fields, casting long shadows that shifted slowly with the morning breeze. The river's gentle current mirrored the healing energy flowing through the land, carrying memories of the storm yet cleansing the valley of fear and sorrow. The frontiersman moved among the workers, hands coated with soil, muscles aching from effort, yet his spirit felt lighter, aligned with the rhythm of restoration. The sisters followed closely, their eyes reflecting the sun's golden glow. Each step they took was deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of their sacred duty and of the hero who had protected them. Where once they had clung in fear, now they walked with quiet confidence, their presence radiating a calm authority that uplifted the valley itself. Their sacred lineage, once threatened, now infused the land with serenity, bridging human courage and natural renewal. The tribe worked diligently, clearing debris, repairing pathways, and restoring shelter. Every motion carried a weight of respect for the land and a reverence for the trials that had shaped this day. The frontiersmen guided efforts where needed, offering steady hands and unspoken wisdom. Sweat dripped from brow to soil, and yet with each task completed, the valley responded. New shoots pushed through trampled earth, the river's edge strengthened against erosion, and the sound of returning wildlife punctuated the labor with hope. He paused at the edge of the river, feeling its cool water flow between his fingers. The current was gentle now, yet he knew its strength. Its capacity for destruction mirrored his own journey. He had faced torrents, rivals, and storms, yet here, in the act of renewal, he understood the meaning of redemption, to heal, to restore, to protect, not for glory, but because it was right. The sisters knelt, planting seeds along the riverbank, their hands brushing the earth with reverence. The frontiersman joined them, his actions deliberate, careful, infused with respect for life and continuity. Every seed sown was a promise that courage endured, that honor remained intact, that the sacred could flourish when shielded by unwavering devotion. A gentle wind carried whispers of gratitude, rustling the grass and bending the saplings toward the sun. The valley seemed alive with acknowledgement, as if nature itself recognized the efforts, the sacrifices, and the courage that had protected this land. Even the river, now calm, sang softly, its surface catching glimmers of light like scattered jewels reflecting past trials and future hope. As the day progressed, the frontiersman observed the subtle return of life. Birds returned to branches, the scent of wet earth rose warmly, and distant laughter of children echoed through the fields, signaling the restoration of harmony. Relationships mended alongside the land, the tribe's trust in him, the sisters' faith, and the fragile bond between man and nature strengthened with each careful act. For the frontiersman, this was more than physical labor. It was redemption of the soul. Every effort to heal the valley reflected his own journey. Past mistakes acknowledged, courage reaffirmed, moral clarity maintained. The river had tested him, the storm had refined him, and now, in quiet labor and patient restoration, he found a profound sense of renewal. The sisters rose, their hands brushed with soil, eyes radiant with pride and gratitude. The valley reflected their joy, vibrant with life, sunlight glimmering across the river, fields, and forest. The frontiersman stood beside them, feeling the harmony settle deep into his bones. knowing that courage, honor, and moral integrity had restored not only lives, but the very essence of the land. And in that moment, as the wind carried the scent of wet earth and new growth, he understood the truth of all he had fought for. Redemption is not given in words or ceremonies. It is earned through steadfast action, the protection of what is sacred, and the dedication to restoring balance when chaos threatens all. The valley had been healed, the sacred trust preserved, and the frontiersman, standing amidst renewed fields and flowing waters, felt the quiet, unshakable peace of moral and personal redemption. Twilight settled across the valley, soft amber light spilling over calm waters, reflecting a world finally at rest. The river whispered gently, its current carrying away the echoes of storms and battles, leaving only the quiet pulse of life renewed. Shadows stretched long across the fields, and the first stars began to pierce the evening sky, fragile yet resolute against the fading light. The frontiersman stood at the riverbank, shoulders relaxed for the first time in days, eyes tracing the gentle flow of water and the silhouettes of the sisters standing nearby. Their sacred presence had endured, their lineage intact, and the valley, once ravaged by storm and treachery, now thrived in serene equilibrium. He inhaled deeply, tasting the crisp, clean air, feeling the weight of his journey settle into quiet reflection. The tribe moved about the valley, repairing, gathering, and laughing softly. Every action spoke of trust regained, bonds strengthened, and lives intertwined by courage, honor, and moral resolve. The chief approached, a nod of quiet acknowledgment passing between them, a gesture requiring no words. Brotherhood had been earned, deeds recognized, and the moral fabric of the valley restored through unwavering commitment. The sister's eyes met his, luminous and serene, their hands brushing lightly against the frontiersman's. Gratitude and trust flowed silently, a sacred bond beyond language, a testament to trials endured, courage proven, and sacred duty fulfilled. The river reflected their unity, shimmering in the twilight like molten gold, a mirror of endurance and hope. The wind whispered through tall grasses, carrying the scent of damp earth, wildflowers, and flowing water. Each ripple, each sway, seemed to echo the lessons carved into the valley's memory, that bravery is measured not by survival alone, but by the willingness to act for others, to protect what is sacred, and to uphold honor when all else fears to move. The frontiersman's gaze swept over the valley, absorbing the quiet harmony that had been restored. Every scar upon the land was a reminder of trials faced, every calm stretch of river a testament to vigilance and moral clarity. The journey had tested his courage, challenged his integrity, and demanded relentless dedication. And in this moment of reflection, he understood that the true horizon was not the setting sun, but the enduring principle that guided his every step. Action born of conscience leaves a legacy far beyond personal survival. The sisters stepped closer, the river's light catching their features, sacred and eternal. The tribe's presence behind them reinforced the truth. The bonds forged in courage, honor, and selfless dedication could withstand storms, floods, and betrayal. The valley itself seemed to lean into this quiet wisdom, the land, river, and people unified in a tapestry of redemption, trust, and moral victory. The frontiersman turned slowly toward the river, letting the gentle current carry his thoughts. He knew the story would live on, not only in tales told around fires, but in the sacred echoes of the land, in the laughter of children, in the murmuring river that bore witness to courage proven and honor upheld. Every life touched, every action taken, every sacrifice made had shaped the moral horizon he now beheld. As twilight deepened and stars grew brighter, the valley fell into a hush that was both profound and eternal. The frontiersman's eyes lingered on the water, golden light, fading into silver reflections, and he felt the quiet power of deeds carried faithfully to their rightful place. In this hush, In the stillness of the river and the calm of the valley, he understood the timeless truth of all he had lived and done. True courage is measured not by the storms one survives, but by the lives one protects, the honor one preserves, and the moral horizon one upholds. In the hush of the river's evening, the valley bathed in amber light. The frontiersman stood among the tribe, shoulders relaxed, eyes tracing the gentle shimmer of water reflecting the twilight sky. The sisters stood close, their sacred presence serene and unwavering, the river murmuring softly at their feet. Every stone, every blade of grass, every ripple carried the memory of storms endured, battles fought, and courage proven. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, a quiet hymn to honor, integrity, and deeds executed with moral clarity. The tribe moved about in calm purpose, the laughter of children, the careful tending of livestock, the restoration of homes, a living testament to trust regained, bonds forged, and justice upheld. The frontiersman inhaled deeply, feeling the pulse of life and the rhythm of the valley around him. He understood now that true bravery was not measured by survival, nor by strength alone, but by the willingness to stand when others faltered, to act for the vulnerable, and to protect the sacred with unwavering dedication. The river's soft current carried this truth, flowing endlessly as a mirror of courage, sacrifice, and honor preserved. And in that quiet twilight, the moral of his journey crystallized into a single, enduring truth. Some debts are paid not with blood, but with the courage to face the dawn, to guard the innocent, and to act when all else fears to move. The valley, the river, the tribe, and the sacred sisters bore witness, eternal and unwavering, to the legacy of a man whose deeds had bound him to honor, to justice, and to the moral horizon that no storm, treachery, or flood could ever erase.